Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Can you share a little bit about what you're up to these days?
Yes, quite recently I have decided to explore the different cultures of Asia. I am traveling through Asia, soon to be in Europe. And my goal while traveling through Asia is to meet with others who are finding that their communication skills are not on par with their standards and want to improve whatever messages they're thinking out clearly and directly. So I am working one-to-one private coaching with working professionals, largely in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in Indonesia, places like that in Southeast Asia, on improving their communication skills.
What was Drew like as a kid? Do you have any early fond childhood memories that you could share? What were you like growing up?
I would say I was a little erratic. I liked new experiences. I would say I was always bored quite quickly. As soon as I adjusted to something, I found new ways to challenge myself. I didn't like staying put in one single space. I remember being in grade school. I cannot remember specifically which grade. And I had an opportunity to collaborate on a grade school project with a few others. I finished the project relatively quickly with my team at that time, and I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to continue stretching the boundaries of whatever that project was doing. So I actually volunteered myself to join in on other projects to help them in any ways I could, because I tackled it and I beat it or finished that assignment pretty quickly. Constantly like stimulation from new environments. I find it helps me to focus.
Sounds good. Is it a common trait among like the Sisera clan and most cultures of that, or are your parents and other family members totally different than that nature?
Actually, I would say I am the odd one out in that regard. I have 3 sisters, 1 older, 2 younger, and I am the only one that has left the furthest I could, even within Canada. I decided to travel to Vancouver for a certain period of time, spend 3 years there, and everybody's reaction was like, "Why, Drew? Why do you want to do this?" And I just said, as honestly as possible, I'm just kind of bored with where I am right now, and I need that new stimulation. And they're like, "Oh, that's just typical Drew doing his Drew things again."
Growing up, how was the school situation? So you mentioned finishing a project early and helping others. Does that mean that you were a good student and you had aspirations to continue on, and that's what led you to become a teacher? Or what was the kind of influence along the way to, start in school and then continue down?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was the most academic student. I didn't really quite understand at that age why it's important to be successful in academics, other than the traditional parenting that any child might get, which is, it'll protect your future, it'll open up your opportunities. Throughout high school, I found myself to be a little bit more focused in the second half because I understood the qualifications required to get into university and to continue down a road that my parents wanted for me. So I was really setting my goals for myself, not so much for myself, but to make my parents proud. And it wasn't until I finished high school, went to university, that I really understood the value of loving what you do and loving what you study. I didn't really like what I was doing much in high school and the required courses. But once I found my specialty in university, I excelled at it. I was passionate about it. And it's found ways to influence my current career decisions now.
I'd love if you share, because I can imagine that mindset or that situation is fairly common amongst listeners here, where it's what mom and dad wants, what your culture, what society wants for you versus really what you want. Can you walk us through maybe the high school to say, like, what were the expectations? What did they want you to do? What were the goals that you set for them? And then maybe we'll get into like the switch later on. So what was that initial path that you realized you didn't quite like?
I'd say my parents were pretty progressive. And growing up, they understood that what I want to do might be different from the traditional trades that are quite common in my family and my extended family. Lots of manual hand labor, fixing cars and mechanic stuff. And they saw it in me growing up that I wasn't really a hands-on type person. I liked to do typically things that involved a little bit more thinking, a little bit more abstract ideas, reading and such. So in high school, my family gave me goals and said, "Drew, you need to secure good enough grades." That's all they're happy with. Good enough grades to get into a college or to get into university. They don't really care what I do after that. They just want to make sure I have the foundation of knowing that I could always return back to university or college to continue whatever education you need to get you to wherever you decide to be once you're in your 20s or even 30s.
Right.
So that pressure was mainly just on getting the basic grades. And that pressure I knew would be good for me. I didn't quite understand how at that age because, you're a high school student and you have friends and you have pressures in many different ways. But I did understand the long-term purpose of what they were doing, and I followed it.
So you're on this path where mom and dad, you need to get a degree, like diploma, whatever it is, college, university, something. What was your process to kind of pick something? Because it's not necessarily an easy undertaking, right? There's so many different programs, such a variety out there. So obviously you weren't going into trades, but even in humanities, I don't know if you considered any STEM, those types of things, but how did you decide to pick like the degree, the schooling that you were required to do?
Yeah. You know what? This is a question that even my younger sister, now she is 17, she's going into grade 12, and she's asking me those questions as well because she's feeling anxious about knowing that the time is coming where you kind of have to create a commitment. And I'll be honest, Luki, I didn't quite know. I remember sitting down at a Swiss chalet at a diner with my mom. We were looking at all of the programs and all of the books for all the universities, and we're like, okay, what fits me best? And my mom knows my character from childhood quite well, and she said, this is where I see you. And I said, I don't like this. I like the idea of this. So it turned out when I went to university, I went for business management at the University of Waterloo. It was a joint program between the humanities and business. It was called Arts and Business. And I was not doing well in the business aspect. I was failing finance. I was failing economics, but I was excelling quite dramatically at the communications aspect and the humanities. And so I had to make quite a radical and quite frightening change in realizing this is what I like. I'm passionate about it. And so I should leave the business aspect, let me excel in what I know and what I'm good at, and I will find a way when I'm older. And I'm trusting myself largely. I will find a way to utilize that in a way to make my life better. And that's what's led me, I would say, long-term to where I am now.
That's awesome. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about like that decision-making, because when folks are in something that they thought they could or wanted to do, and then they realize, no, it's got to be this other, that can be a bit of a shift. And then, well, there's probably costs where like all the courses that you took is now weekend transfer and this and that. What was the experience like for you to lead up to the decision? And maybe like, was there like a tipping point that says, okay, I'm doing it? Or was it slow build or just like a spur of the moment thing? What was that decision process like?
Good question. I remember it was a big clue to me, and quite an obvious sign when I was feeling anxious, waking up every day on campus, going to my classes, knowing that I'm not emotionally connected. I'm not even logically connected to what I was studying. I had like 2 courses that I really loved, and then the remaining 3 in the first year were all business and math related, and that's what got me anxious. So I think that anxiety and that inner pressure to make a change for myself was kind of the large indicator that told me this is not what I should be doing right now. And I should follow what I really like. And if I can excel at something I really like, I'll find ways to challenge myself because I know myself well enough. And so I won't ever just set myself and be happy or content with that current level of challenge. If I excel, I'll find new opportunities to go deeper. So I think that was the biggest change.
And was that a very personal decision and you just did it? Or was there a lot of like back and forth with mom and dad to say like, hey, mom and dad, this is what I'm wrestling with?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes when something is prescribed to you, then you have to do it. But I guess there was more, at least get a foundation, whatever the foundation is, it's there. So what was the conversation like with parents or those close to you? If you could share a little bit on that.
Yeah. And again, I think that connects back to what I had originally said about my parents being pretty open-minded and progressive with my decisions. They knew that I was at the age where I knew what I like and I don't like after being in university and being in those courses. And when I told them, listen, mom, dad, I feel like I'm wasting time because I'm doing something I don't like. It's wasting your money because I know you're helping me to finance this education. I know what I like and I want to pursue that. They did muddy the waters a little bit with me. They did play devil's advocate, as they should, to make me think about it more clearly. But ultimately they said, Drew, it just sounds like you went into the wrong program, but in that wrong program, you found what you do like. And so I think that is just the step or the required step towards your defined path. So they encouraged me to make that decision for the betterment of myself.
And I think that's great that your parents played devil's advocate because they want to make sure you're serious about it, just flip-flopping and changing on a whim. But if you're committed to it, well, that sees or shows a little bit of interest and passion versus, I'm just going to waste another couple of months, hundreds, thousands of dollars of tuition. I'm wondering if you can talk to us about that switch. So now you've switched out of business and now you're in this area that you're supposed to love and enjoy. Like, was that all rainbows and unicorns afterwards, or what was that process like afterwards you switched?
Oh, I think with any university program, it'll never be rainbows, definitely. There's always a level of challenge, intellectual challenge, right? And I took courses that some of them I didn't like within that field. But no, Luki, I'll be honest with you. As I have traveled around the world and as I've met many people who disregard the value of a good or solid university education, I usually argue against it. I had the most compelling program that fit me, and I was very lucky to find it. I enjoyed it a lot. I was very passionate about it, and I feel like it gave me a skill set that I have been able to intertwine into all areas of my life, and that skill set is communication. I did study speech communications at the University of Waterloo, and this was the only university, or is the only university across Canada to offer this particular program. So it was very competitive. And the only way that I had gotten in is because I went through that connected program with the business and communication. So I felt like it was meant to be for me to get into that area of study.
For a lot of folks that are against the university system, it's more of like, if you were like previous Drew that was down the business path and was forced to do that, well, that's a little bit kind of muddy versus I have this skill set and this is the right place to develop it. I think that's amazing. Okay, you're in this program, communications is there. Did you have a sense of, okay, when I graduate, I'm going to go abroad and start teaching folks in like Asia and do that? Was that always in the cards, or were you even thinking about it, or just enjoying yourself in the moment? Like, after the switch, what were you thinking about in the future from a career perspective?
I was always concerning myself with, okay, what am I going to do next? As soon as university's done, what will I do? What will I do? And I guess it's a quality of myself I wouldn't say I was that proud of, because it would be an uncontrollable concern about the future, what's not to be known about the future, that it would affect my immediate thinking. And I remember raising this with my girlfriend at that time through university, and my mom and my dad and my friends. And they said, Drew, you found what you're good at. You found what you like. You're enjoying it. You know, it's teaching you qualities and skills that you're going to find in the future a way to handle it. Get through this and cross that bridge once you're done, right? Just stay focused on your grades and getting through university, and we'll figure that out down the road. And I kind of absorbed that mentality. I wouldn't say I disregarded, any concern for the future, but I knew I should kind of worry about that once I'm coming to the end of my university education. To answer your question quite quickly though, Luki, no, I didn't really know exactly how I was going to apply it to my life. I knew I was learning a skill set that could be used in almost any career, which is, how do you communicate your ideas thoughtfully and with meaning? And I knew whatever challenges, or I felt whatever challenges come my way after university, I will find a way to intertwine it. I did do some jumping around between different careers, and it is only quite recently, about 6 or 7 years after graduation, that I would say I am the most comfortable and confident in my current career.
Sounds good. And it's great that it's a foundational skill set, because everybody needs to learn to communicate at one level, even if you're the most technical of the technicals. You still need to get those ideas out there. So I'd love if you shared a little bit about the path where, okay, you graduated, you got the hat and the diploma and whatever it is, and you're out in the real world. And now you have to figure out like what you want to do with your life. What was that process like? What were some of the exploration areas that you thought were going to be the thing and then it turned out not? Or like, what was that path like after graduation?
And that's what's challenging about was challenging about my program, is that it gave me a fundamental skill, like you said, that you can utilize in so many ways. But because its utility is quite general, it's hard to take it and then narrow down into a particular field. So after I graduated from university, I realized I wanted to be alone. I wanted to leave Ontario, leave my family, and figure out something new for myself, explore a new area. So I moved out to Vancouver.
Can you share, like, how did that come about? Was that just more like, hey, an epiphany, I woke up one day, I want to leave this all? Because that seems like a fairly drastic decision.
And Luki, I won't lie, it actually was. In reality, I saw like a picture of Vancouver on Google, and I was like, wow, this looks beautiful. And I actually didn't know I was looking at Vancouver. And my girlfriend at that time said, oh, Drew, that's just on the other side of Canada. And I was like, oh, I don't really have anything planned for when university is done, so maybe I'll go check that out. And I booked my flight and I decided to venture out there. Now, while I was in university, I was working at the Apple Store. So I was funding parts of my education through part-time work at the Apple Store, and thankfully, the Apple Store was able to make a transfer for me out to Vancouver. So I was able to kind of explore new areas of Canada, explore myself, because I had much more free time to dive into some of the things I like to do in my own time. And after I moved out to Vancouver, that's when I started to really explore my interests. I got into music.
I said, nah, baby, no, 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 no.
I got into photography. I explored the arts. I networked a lot with various people that I would not have normally living in Ontario or within my comfortable zone. And I also jumped between different jobs as well.
So, well, no offense to the Apple Store, but most people don't graduate university hoping that they work at the Apple Store, right? What was some of the, I guess, the activities that you did? You mentioned photography, music, and things like that. Was that just like a after work type of thing, on the weekends type of thing? And how did you start transitioning from like the Apple Store into something like more, I'll call it quote unquote serious? But I'd love for you to fill in a little bit of that journey if you can.
I remember when I decided to move out to Vancouver, I was thinking, what am I going to do? Like, what are things that I've always wanted to do that I couldn't because I was so focused on education? Yeah. Quite literally, Luki, I went into my phone and I created a list. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to try acting. I wanted to try car sales. I wanted to try music. I wanted to try photography. So I kept my part-time job at the Apple Store, and on the weekends and after my work, I would explore these. I actually walked right downtown Vancouver into Lucas Talent, which was an acting agency. It was the same acting agency that worked with Ryan Reynolds before he got famous. I walked in, I created an interview, and they added me to their roster. Within 3-4 weeks, I was doing movie auditions and commercial auditions. And it was really interesting and it was really fun, but it was way, way too stressful. I couldn't do it 100% alone. It's like I jumped right into the deep end without any preparation, any training.
Hi there, my name is Drew Cicero. I'm 24 years old and today I'm performing the role of Carl in 5 separate scenes. Scene 1.
And again, I was hitting my limits. I felt the anxiety that I had felt before. I knew that this is not what I had thought. Maybe it's not the right timing for me, so I'm going to back away from this. And then I decided I would pursue a little bit of photography because I was always interested in that. So I picked up my camera, I walked around, I created a website and a portfolio, and I started to showcase and sell my photography in my spare time. Luckily, I did make a few sales. It was definitely not a big element of my career, but I was able to create photos that I think lots of people were, or most people were inspired by, and some of them were able to print off.
You mentioned car sales. Like, did you ever get into car sales?
So I came home, I flew home to Ontario maybe once every 4 or 5 months to see my family. And my dad would always ask me, hey, Drew, what are you up to out there? I was like, okay, I'm taking pictures. And I tried acting. And my dad said, hey, Drew, have you ever considered picking up a harmonica? And I was like, harmonica? What? Like, the name sounds so familiar. What is it? So he gave me one of his harmonicas. And I immediately, like Luki, in all my spare time, just walking and sitting in my room, I picked up that harmonica and I taught it to myself over the course of 6 or 7 months. I started performing open mics with bands. I started networking among the band community and performing vocals, harmonica. Unfortunately, again, nothing quite major, but I was out there. I was making music. I was writing. I was collaborating with musicians. While I was doing all this, I was realizing Apple is kind of a little outdated for me. I'm not getting any new stimulation or challenge in that regard. So I need a new actual source of income. And I always wanted to try selling cars. So I walked into Ford in Burnaby, Vancouver, and I applied for car sales there, and I got involved in the car sales business for about 6 to 7 months before I realized again that was not fitting for my personality.
And a whole bunch of different interesting, well, questions that I have is like harmonica. How easy is that to come up to a band and ask, hey, do you need a harmonica? Because I could see guitarist, drummer, vocalist, that sort of thing. But then harmonica?
Exactly. That was the reaction I got.
Would you mind sharing maybe a story or two about like asking and maybe getting, or asking and maybe getting rejected? Any of those stories that you could share?
Interestingly, I would not usually announce that I have a harmonica. I have sung my whole life, so I am a vocalist. I have a song on Spotify and Apple Music. So I would usually go out and perform open mics, just singing as a frontman.
Did you come on over and you bring me down to my knees?
And then spontaneously for a solo, I would rip out my harmonica and I would start harmonicaing. And people would be like, whoa, we haven't seen a harmonica for quite some time. The beauty about a harmonica is it accents really well with the melody of any song, particularly blues and rock. So you can hide it, you can keep it mobile with you, and whenever you need it to accent a little bit more of whatever you're trying to perform, it's a great small little addition. I never received any negative feedback other than you need to practice more at the beginning. But people were quite inviting to the opportunity to hear that live on a microphone.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes a little bit more sense, because leading with the harmonica might be a bit more of a challenging proposition. Out of Apple, now in car sales, and then obviously, well, I know you as the traveler off in Asia. How did that prospect come about?
After car sales, again, I realized that car sales didn't really fit me. I felt a lot of pressure at the workforce to sell, and sometimes borderline, I wouldn't say lying, but through borderline selling tactics that just didn't fit with me, right? I realized this is not who I am. I don't like basing my commission off of how quickly I can get somebody into a car. And I decided after that, I was going to go into tech support. I have always saw that as an opportunity. I worked at Apple. I had a pretty good resume with regards to technology. So I worked at a startup company after Ford called Clio, which was a software solutions company for lawyers across Canada, the US, Hong Kong, some parts in Asia. And I worked on their onboarding team. Lawyers would get this new software from the sales team. They would get forwarded to me. I would manage their case by helping them and training them how to use the software through Zoom calls. So I was managing at one point, Luki, 89 different law firms at once across the globe. People emailing me, jumping on meetings to learn how to use the software. Now, each law firm has about 5 or 6 people working on it. So I got emails like crazy, right? It taught me a great skill set, amazing customer service. That was 150% what I had to do. It taught me multitasking skills on a level that I don't think I've ever even exercised before. So I excelled in that. I was happy doing it. And it wasn't until my friend, who is Taiwanese, who I went to university with, told me that she's going back to Taiwan. And she told me you should come visit it at some point. I felt a recognition, or I felt a familiar feeling that I hadn't since I graduated university and said, I want to go to Vancouver. I was like, wow, Taiwan, the other side of the world, completely new culture, new food, new people, new experiences. Why can't I do it? Why not? And that is kind of what sparked that journey into seeing different cultures and helping people.
Sounds like there's a trend here where it's the spark that comes out and like, boom, suddenly it turns around and turns into the next chapter of your life. So you're on a plane. At that point, had you been out of the country, out of the continent, that sort of thing? Or that's kind of the first foray out? Was it nerve-wracking or probably exciting at the same time? Like, share a little bit of that experience.
With my family growing up, we would go on, resort vacations, Jamaica, Cuba, things like that. But to know that I'm leaving everything familiar of my country to completely indulge myself in a new culture, surround myself with as much of something that I'm not familiar with, was exciting, super exciting, because I love that. I love the new journey. But also, yes, nerve-wracking. I didn't really know what to expect. I knew I would be a little disoriented, not being able to communicate with people, not being able to express my ideas. But that was what I was passionate about. How can I communicate clearly? And what would it look like to try to communicate clearly with people who don't use the same grammar structure in their language that you do, right?
That's awesome. I'm wondering if you can go back and share like maybe the first class that you taught, like first class in Taiwan, halfway across the world, that sort of thing. What was that experience like?
When I first arrived in Taiwan, I planned it so that I had a little bit of time to adjust to the culture. I had 2 weeks to network with people, to meet up with friends that I had been networking with through Facebook groups, local Taiwanese who were showing me food and such and different elements of their culture. And the first day I went into work, my employer, Taiwanese, couldn't speak English that well, gave me this giant training book. Like, I would say it was maybe 700 pages, and it was a whole curriculum. And she said, okay, you're going to teach this, and we need to make sure this is connected to this, and you're going to have to teach this, and the calendar is spread out over here. She even sounded confused herself because, yeah, it was terrifying. I did not know how I can do this. This was my first time ever doing this, and I really did not receive much in-depth training, right? So I took it among myself to ask my employer. I said, listen, I'm a little overwhelmed. I don't want to underperform. I don't want to let you down. So this is what I know I need. I need to sit in on one of your current teacher's classes so I can take my own notes and I can ask that current teacher exactly how they started. And my employer at that time was like, well, nobody's ever asked to do it that way. And I was like, well, that's what I know would help me get my feet on the ground and to perform at the level that you want me to. So she gave me that hall pass to go ahead and sit in on other people's classes. I networked with local teachers, and they gave me the heads up on how I should be organizing my calendar and the curriculum to teach the first class. But when I did jump in front of that first class, I was teaching grade 1, so young children. We went right into phonics. We went into the pronunciation of different sounds, different letters, and how to make words from them. And I taught, well, I would say it was a fun class. I used my harmonica to keep them entertained, and they were very curious to know what Canada was like. So I often related content of the curriculum to my photography, pictures I took of Canada, into musical elements with my harmonica.
I'd love if we quickly went into some of the other areas that you went to, because Taiwanese is one of many Asian countries that you went into. Were the experiences very similar, very different in each one?
I would say my more formal career experience was teaching at an actual school in Taiwan, and that was through a 1-year working holiday visa. Once my visa expired, my girlfriend and I at that time, I met her in Taiwan. She's still my girlfriend now. We went back to Canada for 2 or 3 months, and I was teaching online for a local Taiwanese company. It was just conversation classes with working professionals and adults in Taiwan. I was doing it day in and day out, nighttime schedule, and I was going at such detailed and particular levels with the students that the employer of this Taiwanese company didn't want. They didn't want me to stretch beyond whatever the curriculum, the defined curriculum was, even though I knew that what my students liked and what I liked teaching was perfectly in line with each other. They still said, no, don't do it. So that is when I realized, like, okay, I'm passionate about something. I really like to do it so much that I'm even stretching outside of the boundaries of the curriculum to teach it. Maybe I can kind of start doing this on my own. That is when I left the online company. I started marketing my own online services as a communications coach. My girlfriend and I were both teaching online, and that's when we realized, okay, if we're going to teach online and we're both loving it, why not go to Thailand? It's cheaper to live there. We can live in nicer apartments, and we can continue to explore different cultures together. So to answer your question, Luki, yes, I traveled to Thailand, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, and Hong Kong after Taiwan. And each culture does have unique traditions that are deeply ingrained in their cultures that speak towards their history and speak towards their religions. And those little subtle interactions that you have with locals really make the experience special and unique for each country.
Are there any words of wisdom that you want to give to young Drew or the young Drews listening out there at various points in your career that you might want to either elaborate on what you've said before or just kind of net new you want to add into there?
I would say embrace change and invite it with curiosity, genuine curiosity. There is so much you can learn about yourself. There's so much you can learn about the differences between cultures, between people, within that immediate, what we would say, or what you might feel as tension, right? When you go to another country, or you meet somebody who's from a different culture, or you meet somebody who's just in a completely different career as you have, or has a different history, you might find things you disagree with. You might find that there is tension within that relationship or within that communicative structure, that conversation. But usually those are really good indicators that there's opportunity to grow. There's opportunity to develop. There's opportunity to be curious and to inquire further, right? It's similar to the common expression, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. If you're too comfortable in your environment, there's opportunities to learn outside of that immediate environment. And that is kind of what has pushed me. And it's not until recently that I've noticed this philosophy that has guided me through, like you said earlier, different chapters of my life. If I feel that spark, and that spark is terrifying, but it's interesting, I kind of jump on it because I know no matter what, I can always go back. I can always return back to where I was because I already did it. And in the worst case scenario possible, you're still going to be smarter than you were because you had an experience that is different from what you were used to.
Awesome. What I took from that is follow your terror. Oftentimes it's the things that scare you most that there's the biggest growth beyond that, right? Because if you can figure out, well, why am I afraid of it? Because there are certain things where, I don't know, like going into the Amazon jungle and with spiders and stuff, maybe that's not the right thing. But if maybe it's a cultural piece, because your background is communication, anything where you're not as comfortable with that, hey, it's probably worth the exploration. And to your point, if it doesn't work out, you can always go back.
Well, it's one thing I was always telling my family as I was letting them know my plans to travel. I told my dad I'm going to go to Taiwan. And my dad is Italian. He was like, really? Taiwan? Why would you? How would you ever want to go to Italy? Right? And I explained how different it is, how opposite 100% it is from everything in my family, everything I'm used to. And he said, well, Drew, do it because you're young. You got your degree. You did exactly what we asked of you. So go do it. And if you hate it, whatever, just come back. You're fine. And it was like, you're actually right. Sometimes it is that easy and we don't realize it. It is pretty easy to jump on the bandwagon, do your research, and if you don't like it, you can always return.
And I think it has something to do with comparison culture we'll hear right now. Everybody's moving ahead, different things, and to be seen kind of going back or stepping back is not necessarily well received, but sometimes that's the best place to start because now you're back, but you're further. Yeah. And again, probably more podcast episodes, but we'd love to hear a little bit about what are some future aspirations, some things that we can look forward to hearing about in the next few weeks, months, years, that sort of thing. And then where can folks reach out to you if they need some help being a little bit more confident in their communication?
I'm continuing my journey, heading back to Japan for an additional 3 months. Okay. From Japan, I will continue my journeys into Europe. I might go to Africa. I'll continue spreading my skills with those who need it. And as I'm doing this, I'm developing my career. It's changing in different directions here and there. I'm developing new platforms. I'm utilizing new AI tools that are helping my clients hear their own progress, to see it and interact with others. As much as it is a surprise to somebody else, I'm actually still kind of surprising myself because I am defining what I'm good at and I'm defining what my clients or my students like as I'm doing it with them, and I'm experimenting on the go. We're going to see where it goes. But if anybody does want to reach out to me, if anybody does want to follow me, you can see everything on my website, which is www.drewcicera.com. It links to my Facebook, my LinkedIn, my Instagram, where they can see more of my personal journey through all these cultures. And of course, on my website, you can see live demos of my classes. You can reach out to me if you want to know more about some of the services I offer, whether it's public speaking, interviewing skills, or conversational skills at all. That's where you can find everything about me.
That's awesome. And we'll definitely include all of that in the show notes. And thanks so much, Drew, for sharing your story. Again, there's lots to be sought after in terms of the adventures that you'll have in all those different places. And hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode.
Thank you, Luki. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast.